interested in it. We hope that the president is now ready to listen to other ways of going forward than his kind of my way or the highway course of action that has gotten us into the dilemma that we face today.
From the New York Daily News this morning, there's a look at Lee Hamilton. It's page A2 by James Meek. And he quotes former Senator Bob Kerrey, who says, "Wishful thinking got us into this war, but wishful thinking won't get us out."
Well, actually, Mr. Hamilton was at the Center for American Progress last week, and I think they're essentially saying that if we're just hoping for the best, that's going to drive us to a conclusion. That's correct. There are some very serious issues on the table and some very serious change that has to take place. I mean, the kinds of things that we talk about in strategic redeployment, deploying the troops in over the course of 18 months, leaving the appropriate number in the region to try and protect and support the Iraqi government as it stands on its own and its own security forces, sending a special envoy to that region and developing a regional conference along the lines of the conference that dealt with the issues that were in the former Yugoslavia. There's some very serious issues on the table, and we need to take firm steps going forward.
Next call is from Meriden, Connecticut. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to see the Democrats do something about that police state we seem to be developing. I'm pretty sure that all the new vehicles that are manufactured in this country have a satellite tracking device in them.
Well, I think the caller is certainly raising some concerns about civil liberties. And one of the things that we talk about in our report, the Center for American Progress Action Fund report for the first 100 hours, is addressing the issue of FISA and the president's warrantless wiretapping program, and making sure that the president doesn't act without first coming to Congress, adhering to the law, coming to Congress and saying, I have a problem and the current law doesn't allow me to address the security of the nation as it should be, and these are the resources I need to do it. In other words, the president can't act alone. The president has to act in tandem with Congress to address this issue and can't circumvent the law in doing so.
Let me summarize a few points from Fred Barnes. We talked about this piece. He writes in the Weekly Standard that the president needs to have some moxie in the executive to be bold. For example, the president should fire some generals who have failed in Iraq. He should keep John Bolton as the UN ambassador. He should stop earmarks. He should push for radical energy independence, and he should give judicial nominees recess appointments.
That's quite the hefty list. I think it's that kind of attitude and that kind of those kinds of steps that have gotten the president into the problem and into the quandary that he's in today, along with the other conservatives. I think, first of all, you look at the issue of John Bolton and his service at the UN. Essentially, I think that's a non-starter. What both Democrats and many Republicans have said is that this nomination isn't going to go forward. So if the president wants to continue to thumb his nose at Congress, particularly when there's a relationship between Congress on nominees, he can do that, but I think that's the kind of action and activity that's gotten him into the current predicament. The same thing with judicial nominees. Recently he sent, I think, 6 nominees back to the Hill that had been nominated before, plus 4 new nominees. In fact, one of them had been deemed unqualified, unanimously unqualified. He can't keep going it alone and continuing to ignore Congress.
Our guest is Melody Barnes. She is Policy Vice President at the Center for American Progress in Washington. The web address, by the way, is americanprogress.org if you want to get more information. It's also linked at C-SPAN's website, Concord, California. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for the call, Steve and Melody. And to Mr. Bolton, in my humble opinion, I think listening to Mr. Voinovich and Mr. DeWine, former critics of his, have totally come over to his side. So I think Mr. Bolton is going to be probably put in as a deputy assistant. But to my question to you, Melody, I think the last election was a bit of an idea-free zone. My question to you on the minimum wage. Will the minimum wage, if it's raised, will that increase or decrease unemployment statistics? One. Second, from all the statistics I've seen, if they will do this, it will actually raise unemployment. You will have people lose their jobs. Maybe that's something we need to deal with for the short term, for the benefit of the long term. But my question to you is, will that raise unemployment? And second, in your opinion, should the United States government be in terms of the problems in the world, should we be leaning forward into this, do you think, in terms of our presence in the Middle East, or do you honestly think that we'd be better off pulling back and kind of withdrawing a little bit like the Republicans wanted to do in World War II, which was incorrect? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to the caller for the questions. First of all, the minimum wage isn't a new experiment. We've raised the minimum wage in the past, and there's always the boogeyman that raising the minimum wage is going to raise unemployment, that small businesses are going to go under. And the facts tell us quite the opposite. There are studies that have been done on this, and history tells us what will happen if the minimum wage is passed. In fact, people will get the kind of income that they need so that work actually pays, work works for people. We can start moving people up and create greater mobility in this country. So I think that the caller is relying on old myths in his assessment of what an increase in minimum wage will do. I agree with the caller, if I understood him correctly. I don't think that we can withdraw from the Middle East. I think, in fact, that's been the current administration's policy going forward. They've ignored the Middle East, and to our detriment. Until we gain greater credibility in that region, we're going to see hot spots continuing to flare up as opposed to our ability to try and address them and address what's going on with Israel and its borders, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, and the rest of the region.
Before joining the Center for American Progress, our guest served for 7 years as the chief counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and is then minority member, Senator Kennedy, who will soon become a majority member of the Senate in the 110th Congress, is a graduate of the University of Michigan, where she earned her law degree, and her undergraduate from UNC Chapel Hill. Upper Marlboro, Maryland is next. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning. Pardon me, I'm a first-time caller. Basically, I wanted to ask your guest, how does she feel about the premise that it seems to me, in order to democratize Iraq, we're destroying the democracy in this country? And my second comment, quickly, and I'd like to hear a response, is it's been a proven fact that democracy does not work in all parts of the world. I remember many years ago, a TV program, its opening line was, "Democracy is a bad form of government, but it's the best form. It's the best form on earth." My whole thought process is this: that democracy does not work in all parts of the world for all different reasons, religious, cultural reasons, and that type of thing. And I find it very ironic that this administration is pushing democracy on people through the barrel of a gun, but backdooring and taking away our rights here in this country. And I want to say thank God for C-SPAN, because we're going to wake up one morning and C-SPAN is going to be one of the very few outlets that we can express our democratic views. Thank you. I just want to hear her comment. Thank you.
Appreciate the call from Maryland.
Great. Thank you for your question. I think the first part of the caller's comment dealt with the issue of civil liberties. Mm-hmm. And certainly, again, looking back at history, during times of war, presidents have often pulled back with regard to civil liberties, and then there's been a pendulum swing in the other direction to regain those kinds of protections. I think part of the problem when you have a war on terror is you don't know when the war is going to end, so you don't necessarily get a sense of when we're going to get our civil liberties back. So as the caller suggests, we have to be very careful. And it goes to the point I was making about FISA, making sure that the president adheres to the law, making sure that the president and Congress work together so that you get all of the best minds on focusing on these problems and you get the appropriate balance. With regard to the caller's point about democracy, I think it is important that we not expect every country to look exactly like ours. I'm certainly proud to be an American, proud of our democracy, but countries are going to handle and reflect democracy differently. And we certainly have to work with people in various regions. There's an election in Venezuela. We have to work with people in whether it's South America or the Middle East who are supportive of democracy promotion to advance those goals. But as the caller says, you can't go in and enforce it through the barrel of a gun.
In CQ